In this module, we're going to be talking about maintaining your sourdough starter, specifically maintaining it in the refrigerator. This is the method that I have used for years, and I think that it's much better than keeping it on the counter for a couple of reasons. Number one, it stays in a more active stage longer because it's a slower fermentation in the fridge. And number two, you don't have to feed it as often. And so you're using less flour. And if you are watching this course, you're milling your own wheat, and you don't want to be just using it over and over again if you don't have to. So I'm going to tell you how I maintain my starter. I'm also going to be adding in some footage from a week of me using my starter and kind of give you visual ideas of how I take care of my starter. So I had a question the other day, and I think that it's important to address this before we get more into how to care for your starter. And the question was along the lines of, so you say you feed your starter once or twice a week. Is this an established starter, or is this what about if you're brand new, if your starter's new? And I want to clarify that. So a brand new starter, you can start maintaining it in the way that I'm going to tell you as soon as you're at either day 5 or 7 and it has been consistently active after you feed it within 4 to 12 hours. So what you're looking for is on day 5, or sometimes it takes a few days more, you're looking for, after you feed it, you want it to get very bubbly and have like a yeasty smell. You know that by that time, everything is level and it's ready to go into what I call a maintenance stage, which means it's active. Now, it may not be active enough to make a loaf of bread just yet, but you still need to use it so that you can feed it to build it up so that it will be strong enough. So this is my method. On day 5 or 7, depending on the day when you have a starter that is active and bubbly after you have fed it, you can go ahead and put it in the refrigerator. And then what I want you to do is to start looking for recipes that call for sourdough discard. These are recipes that call for starter, and you don't need the strength of the starter to rise the bread product or the muffin or the biscuit, things like that. You're merely using your starter at this point so that you can build it up and feed it. And it also adds flavor to those recipes. So for instance, muffins, pancakes, waffles, biscuits, scones. I have several scones. I have a couple right now and I have more coming. Crackers, sourdough discard sandwich bread is another one. There are so many. If you can go on my blog, therosehomestead.com, and just type in the search bar discard. There are all kinds of discard recipes, and why you would want discard recipes is specifically for this time in your starter. When your starter is young, you have just made it, and it's just not quite strong enough to raise a loaf of bread in a sufficient amount of time, but you still need to use the starter. And so you can there's so many recipes. You can even just fry the starter. I have a recipe for fry bread, sourdough discard fry bread, which is the easiest. You can just scoop out some starter, add some olive oil, salt, and herbs, and fry it in a hot skillet like a pancake and have it as your bread with your dinner. So easy, so good, and I love to make this from time to time. So once you put it in the fridge, how often do you need to feed this starter to keep it active and to keep it growing? My advice is to feed your starter at least once a week, especially when it's a new starter. So use your starter throughout the week until you get down to where there's not enough to make a recipe. So say less than half a cup. Then you're going to feed it a cup of flour and a cup of water, stir it up, and you can either just go ahead and put it in the fridge if you're not going to be using it for a day or two, or you can leave it out for an hour or two just to kind of give it a head start and then put it in the fridge if you're not going to be using it until the next day. If you want to use it the same day, leave it out until it gets bubbly and active. So what I do is I feed it I put it in the fridge. And then I just pull from it throughout the week to make the recipes that I'm going to be making for that week. And when I get below the amount that I would need to make a recipe, I take it out and feed it again and put it back in the fridge. This is really important right at first because your starter is so young and immature that it's just active, but it's not strong. It's not vigorous. And it takes a little bit of time, not a long time, but it takes a little bit of time to get it to a point where it is so strong that it will rise a big loaf of bread. And so you want to use it. And it's also a good chance for you to pick up a bunch of recipes that you can use your sourdough starter in, because we're always, from time to time, feeding our starter thinking we're going to make bread, and then life happens and we didn't get to make anything that week because things got crazy. That starter is maybe hungry, it has a hooch on top, but you can still use it in these discard recipes. So I want to insert a video that I made a week using my starter. I'm just going to do a portion of that video just to give you an idea of what it looks like visually. Now, this video has been available on my YouTube channel, but I wanted to make it part of this course because if you have this course saved, the playlist, and you want to go back and watch that, you don't have to go looking for it in amongst all my other videos. It will be right here on maintaining your sourdough starter. The reason I made this video in particular the first time is because I think I get more questions about using my starter from the refrigerator than anything, especially at that time. And a lot of people question, how can it work if it's coming straight from the refrigerator? And I can tell you from years of experience that it doesn't phase it at all. It works fine. And to be honest with you, I think it works even better because the slower you can keep the fermentation, the more control you have. If it gets too warm, especially if you're new at making sourdough, it can get away from you. But if you have it just at a bit of a cooler temperature, you can learn the signs of when your sourdough bread is ready, when it's proofed enough, when it's ready for the next step. And so I do find that, especially at first, not cold temperatures, but cooler temperatures can be an advantage for those who are just learning what bulk fermentation looks like and when is my bread actually ready to bake and things like that. And so that's something that we're going to go into in depth on that last video where we make a loaf of bread together. But I want to make sure that I put that in this video, is that learning to see the signs of what your starter's doing, what stage it's in, will help you learn when your bread dough is in a certain stage. So it's just kind of the nuances of starter is something that comes with time. And this particular few weeks with your starter, where you're using it and you're feeding it, is a really good time to just pay attention to smells, pay attention to how it looks, and how that your products taste after you make them. So if you make muffins and you put your sourdough in there, get an idea. It changes the texture, it changes the flavor, and you may find that down the line you use your starter more for those type of recipes than anything. I know a lot of people that do because it's just easy. But I'm going to insert that video now because I want to get a little more in depth visually how that I take care of my starter from day to day through an entire week. And I just find that sometimes visually it helps to learn. And then I'll come back at the end and do kind of a wrap up and conclusion of this module. Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be doing a week in the life of my beloved sourdough starter. I get so many questions about sourdough starter, and I got thinking about it. Wouldn't it be easier to just show you all through the week how I actually use my starter, how I feed it, how long I leave it out, how I know it's ready for the refrigerator after it's been fed, all of those things. And that way you can just have a visual of exactly what I do with my starter, and my starter works remarkably well. using this method. So I was a little bit low on starter. I'm going to show you exactly how low I was on starter. We're going to feed the starter, and I'm going to tell you exactly how long it was before it went into the refrigerator. I'm going to show you what it looked like before I went into the refrigerator. But I do want to make a disclaimer. I don't mark my jar. I don't go by doubling, and so I just know that it's ready, and I'm going to show you how I know. All right, so I'm going to bring the camera over here, give you a good shot. I'm going to show you how low this sourdough starter is. This starter, I've used out of it 3 times, I think, and it was fed sometime last week, but it's still active. It's fine. It was getting a little bit of hooch on top, but I've learned it'll be just fine. I use it just until it needs to be fed again. So that gives you an idea. This was fed sometime last week. We were kind of busy, and I didn't do as much sourdough last week. So let's get you over here and take a look at this starter. So here's how much starter I have left this morning. Probably between 1/4 and 1/2 of a cup of starter. You can see that it is, if I can get that to focus, there's a little bit of liquid in there. You can see that on top. So it's definitely ready to be fed. I did use this straight out of the fridge just a few minutes ago. Alright, so to feed my starter, I like to do around 3/4 cup of water and a cup of flour. I like a bit of a thicker starter, so this is totally up to you. If you want to feed it a cup of water and a cup of flour for just a bit looser, that's fine. Also, I feed my starter whatever I have on hand. I don't have enough flour that's ground up right now to feed my starter, so I'm just going to use some all-purpose flour. So here's the water, and we're going to do a cup. And I'm not particular about this measurement, just a cup of flour. I don't weigh it or anything like that. I just dump it in. These little things are really handy for stirring your sourdough starter. I'll link these down below. It's just really nice to have something long. And of course, if you're using a mason jar, you wouldn't need something quite so long, but I like these jars. And you can see that that's pretty thick. It's not like a stiff starter by any means, but it's a thicker starter. And just make sure you really grab from the bottom of the jar and scrape. That's why I like these two, because you can scrape the bottom of the jar. Scrape it and mix it. Make sure you get lots of air. Air is a big component of sourdough, as much as the water and the flour. So, all right, that looks good. I'm going to put this in the sink, and I'm just going to put my lid on. And because it is summer and we have plenty of fruit flies in this house, I cover mine with a tea towel just to protect it from getting any critters in there. Now it's 8 a.m. We're just going to leave this sit, and I will probably start checking it around 11 or 12, around the 3 to 4 hour mark, and then we'll go from there. Okay, here is my starter after 4.5 hours. As you can see, it's very bubbly, and it smells really good. So I feel like it's definitely time to put this in the refrigerator. You can actually see it bubbling some. I didn't measure it growing, but it looks like it's probably triple from what it was when I first fed it. So this is going in the fridge until I need to make a loaf of bread, which will be tomorrow. So I'm making bread this morning, and if you remember, I fed this starter yesterday, got it good and active, and put it in the fridge. I just literally took it out of the refrigerator, and I'm going to dip out for my loaf of bread, about a cup. And that's it. It's going straight back in the fridge. I have enough starter for another loaf of bread, maybe one more time, but probably one more loaf of bread, and then we'll feed it again. So this is day 2. So I'm making another loaf of bread here. I fed my starter on Monday, and then I made a loaf of bread either Tuesday, I think Tuesday was the next day. Today is Friday, and I am making another loaf of bread, and this uses up the rest of the starter. I have just a little bit left over after adding this to the bread dough. So in the next clip, I'm going to be feeding my starter, and I said in the clip that I was going to show you how much starter was left in the jar, and I fed the starter without thinking about getting the footage. So I'm really sorry about that. But I had less than a quarter cup of starter in the jar before I fed it, so that gives you an idea of how much that I had left. It was maybe even, well, it was less than a quarter cup. I won't say it was an eighth of a cup because I didn't measure it, but it was somewhere between an eighth of a cup to a quarter of a cup. And that's when I feed my starter, when it gets down to just a little bit right in the bottom of the jar. So we've made it to the last day of the week with my sourdough starter. I'm going to overlay how much is left in the jar, but it's almost empty. Made a loaf of bread this morning, and now I'm going to feed it and let it get active before I put it in the fridge. I do want to make a note that I pulled this straight from the fridge to make my bread like I always do this morning. And so we're going to feed it. What I have available right now is some of my freshly milled kamut flour. So I'm going to do about a cup of that. And 3/4 cup of filtered water. Now we're going to stir that very well, making sure to pull up from the bottom where the little bit of starter was left. So I'm going to cover this, wrap it in a towel since we have fruit flies in the kitchen, and check on it in about 4 to 5 hours, and then it'll be ready for the fridge again once it gets active. All right, this is about 4.5 hours later. As you can see, it is very active and bubbly. I find with freshly milled flour, it does tend to ferment a bit quicker. So this is going in the fridge. So I hope that was super helpful for those of you who are just starting out. Now in that particular video, I was using all-purpose flour. My starter now is all freshly milled flour. And let's take a minute and talk about changing your all-purpose starter over to a freshly milled starter. I think I've had more questions since I started this course about changing your starter over to freshly milled flour than any question. And so I'm going to make sure that I put that in the description and the title of this, because I want to make sure that you all knew that I was going to say this. If you have a sourdough starter already and it's all-purpose flour, it is as simple as just changing over the flour. That's all you have to do. After a certain amount of cycles of feeding, you will be a freshly milled flour starter. So here's my advice. I would wait until it gets down to like a quarter cup or less of starter, and then I would feed it a cup of freshly milled flour. Now, I will say that freshly milled flour absorbs water differently than all-purpose flour. You may find, in fact, you probably will find, that you need to add just a bit more water. Because if you think you got it right and you go back like 30, 40 minutes later, it's going to be really thick. So add just a little more than you think to make sure it stays manageable. Unless you like a really thick starter, and then just leave it that way. So I find that with all-purpose flour, when I feed my starter, it would be 1 cup of flour and 3/4 cups of water. But with freshly milled flour, I do 1 cup of water. So I do add an extra half or quarter cup of water when I feed with a cup of freshly milled flour. And I hope that helps. But my starter seems happier on freshly milled flour than it did on all-purpose flour. And I think, and maybe it's just me, my breads are rising better and faster, and I'm getting more of an airy crumb. Even for a 100% freshly milled sourdough artisan loaf, I'm actually getting an airier crumb than I was getting with my all-purpose starter. So this is the bread that I made with that I'm making with my freshly milled starter. And I went back and watched a video of a freshly milled loaf that I made with an all-purpose starter, and it was nothing like this. I know this isn't like an all-purpose flour artisan loaf, but that's not why we're here, right? But this is a light and airy loaf, much better than any other results that I had been getting up until I went 100% freshly milled with my sourdough starter. So I hope that all of this information was helpful. I think it's a really important part of the course because you want to be on the right track with maintaining your starter and keeping it happy. You can feed your starter as many times during the week as you need to. So if you're using it like every day, feed it as often as you need to, and that's great. It'll just get stronger and stronger and stronger. And I actually recommend using it just as much as you can. What I will do is, if I make a loaf of bread, 1 or 2 loaves of bread a week, I will find other recipes to put it in to make sure that I'm able to feed my starter at least once a week, but most weeks twice, because I make a lot of recipes for my blog, and so I am using my starter quite a bit. But I hope that this was helpful, and that you get a better grasp by seeing it visually, how to take care of your starter, and how to convert your all-purpose starter over to a fresh level starter. You don't have to start all over. You can just go ahead and convert the one that you have, and it'll be just fine. So I've switched the modules, I've tweaked them just a bit. Next module is actually going to be sourdough discard recipes and what you can do with sourdough discard. I was looking through the schedule and I decided it would be better to do the sourdough discard video after we talked about maintaining the starter, because we talked about discard recipes. So we're going to be talking all about sourdough discard recipes. I have uploaded so many, and we're going to do kind of a compilation of a bunch of sourdough discard recipes that you can have in one neat little package so that you can just go and make them whenever you want. And then after that, we're going to spend some time talking about my top tips for using freshly milled flour. These are not just for sourdough. They're tips that will help you in all of your freshly milled flour baking, and some things that I've just learned even more recently that I find will be helpful, hopefully will be helpful for you all on your fresh milled flour journey. All right, well, that is this module, how I maintain my sourdough starter and when I feed it, and how to switch your all-purpose starter over to a freshly milled starter. So I'll see you back here next week, same time, same day, and I hope y'all are doing well. If you have any questions, again, as always, leave them in the comment section below, and at the very end of this course, we're going to do a huge Q&A, and I'm going to answer just as many questions as I can that I've gotten throughout the course. I think that's all I have for you today. Do not forget to look in the description box for several resources. There is a Facebook group that we have for the course where we're helping each other out over there, and some printables, different things like that. So don't forget to go check that out. And as always, thank you for joining me today, and we will see you really soon.